I'm Susie Landolfi, and welcome to Be Crazy Well. Now, why would a therapist say that? Because we all have mental health struggles, even therapists. The good news is we have so much more information about how we can be crazy well. On my podcast, we don't focus on what's wrong with us. We want to know what happened to us. We're going to explore how trauma affected us, both negatively and positively. That's right. I said positively. It's called post-traumatic growth, and it's a real thing. Be Crazy Well will share mental health wellness practices, the newest mental health research, and most importantly, how we all get to create the person we deserve to be and the life we deserve to live. So join the mental health evolution and be crazy well. And we'll go. So yes, Joe Mason, I have cowgirl hats because I actually am sort of a real cowgirl late in life. I don't do rodeo, but I do gentle wild horses as a therapeutic activity. And guess what happens? The wild horse gets gentled a little bit and the human gets gentled a lot. That's the secret. They don't know that's going to happen. They think they're just gentling the horse. Because, you're a psychologist, yes?
I'm a psychiatrist.
Psychiatrist, that's right. So you have all kinds of sort of wonderful wellness practices that are magical that we don't always tell the people we're working with right at the beginning, right? We kind of let out some of our wonderful gifts and practices as much as someone can take. Is that true? Do you do that?
Well, I'm retired now, but I tried to do that. I mean, I think anybody in the mental health professional business is obligated to use their skills and assets. And, you're obviously using the things that you care about and know about, because those are the things that you can use best to connect with people. And
yeah, and they worked for me. So one of the things I often say, okay, welcome everybody. I didn't even welcome anybody yet. So this is Joe Mason. He is a psychiatrist. He's worked at the VA for 5 years. He's recently retired. And we're going to talk to him about his experience and hopefully some of your wisdom and solutions of how we can always improve. Because I have a theory that mental health has to keep evolving. From my understanding, Joe, the beginning of modern mental health was drilling holes in people's heads to let the demons out. So we don't necessarily do that anymore. I'm not sure that we don't, but I mean, I just saying, I've never done that. And, I even know that in the DSM, that if you were gay up until 1973, that was considered a mental health disorder. I mean, we look at that now and go, what? And so we have to evolve all the time. And the last thing I'm going to share with you is, and you come so highly recommended, Cindy Thompson from Coming Home Well just couldn't stop talking about you. She was like, get him on. And I said, if she says it, I'm in. And I still tell people this, that I know we take, quote unquote, the Hippocratic Oath, but if we're not careful, we actually take the hypocritical oath. Because I don't have to do what I ask everybody else to do. I can say, hey, you should stop smoking and stop drinking and lose 100 pounds. And I can go home and smoke a carton of cigarettes, drink a bottle of wine, and eat a whole cheesecake myself. Like I have a high blood pressure doctor who I'm doing better managing my high blood pressure than he is, because he won't do some of the things that I'm doing. And we joke about it all the time. He said, yeah, I should probably do more of that. And then next time I go in the same thing. So I just want to tell you that one of the reasons why I love working with veterans is because they're going to do different to be different. They understand training. They understand the idea that if you don't do something differently, then you can't necessarily improve or change, as opposed to just thinking and feeling. So that's why I was excited to have you on, because I said, okay, we're doing this series on the VA, and we get to talk about what we can do better, what we're doing well. Always know what you're doing well so that you won't change that. And then what can you do better? So thank you for joining us on, I don't know if you know the title of this podcast. Did anybody tell you? You might not have said yes if we told you. It's called Be Crazy
Be
Well.
crazy well. Yeah,
Yeah,
yes.
because we're going to be crazy. There's no question about that. If we can do it well, without so much crisis and crisis, I'm in. So please, before you tell us your experience, share a little bit about your practice, your experience, your life work, and what it means to you.
Well, thanks. And Cindy may have exaggerated my gifts, but but she's a really good person, and
Yes, she is.
she and a lot of people in our community, which is Charlottesville, Virginia, do a lot of good work, and so it's admirable. My own background is that I was a social worker. I went to Virginia Commonwealth University School of Social Work and BSW, MSW, and worked as a social worker for a little bit, but got started working in a psychiatric hospital and got mentored by a good psychiatrist who convinced me that I should try to go to med school. So I did, and went into psychiatry, and I worked in a variety of settings. I had a private practice. I worked academically at a down in Roanoke for a while, and did a bunch of different things. Did nursing home work, did consultations in nursing homes for several years. But the last 5 years of my career, I worked at the VA. In Charlottesville, there's the main VA for our area was in Richmond, but Charlottesville has an outpatient clinic, a CBOC, and that's where I worked for 5 years, and then retired at the beginning of the pandemic. So that's my background.
So why the VA? What I mean, obviously you are what I call a want to know person. There's two kinds of people in the world as far as I can figure out so far. It has nothing to do with gender, race, or anything else. It has to do with whether you want to know or you don't want to know. Right? Don't try to tell somebody something they don't want to know. Don't wake them up. It's not going to happen. And then there's these want to know people who continually look for a new experience, a different experience, a broadening of their experiences to increase their wisdom. And it may just be for excitement, but the fact remains is that you're going to get wisdom. That's what's going to happen. And you're going to enrich so much of how you view the world and your own life. So why the VA?
Well, you have a nice way of framing things.
I do, don't I? I'm a nice person. A little crazy, but nice.
Well, I don't know how well plotted out it was. Prior to working at the VA, I worked at state women's prison near Charlottesville. And although I enjoyed the actual work there and working with the inmates, it was managed very poorly. It was run by a private company, and it was they were just dreadful employers to work for. And I had two friends who were psychologists who I knew in the community who both worked at the VA, and one of them told me about an opening that came up there, and so I I was at a good point to move out of the prison, to be released, and I got interested in the VA from that perspective.
And you're a civilian. You did not serve, is that true?
I'm a civilian. That's right. I was in the last year of the draft lottery for the Vietnam War. So I graduated high school in '72, and things were dwindling a bit then. Enlisting then, even though my father, who was a veteran, encouraged me to consider the military, I was not in the frame of mind for that at that time. And Vietnam was a pretty scary place to consider going, which would have been what would have happened. So I do feel a little guilty when after I started, especially after I started working with veterans, that I didn't serve. And so right, I'm a civilian, and part of my retirement was not really that I was desperately seeking to get out of the VA, but my father was dwindling, and I needed to take care of him, and so I took what I thought was going to be a short hiatus, but that coincided with the beginning of the pandemic, and so I just have not returned to real paying work since then. But that's how I got into it, and so I worked for 5 years, and I really enjoyed the clinical work and the veterans I met, and there were a lot of things about the job that were very interesting and humbling and rewarding. But there's a lot about the VA system and the structure of it that really handcuffs mental health professionals.
Can you speak to some of those?
It's a very structured and rigid system, and the problems that I encountered working there were, one was how we were used, and obviously with psychiatrists we cost a little more than psychologists and social workers, so they really wanted us managing medicines and strictly managing medicines and doing very little therapy. I did manage to work in a specific clinic that gave me a little more freedom to do therapy, and I really wanted to do that. And whenever there was somebody that I thought I could help, but the system is not really structured for that. And if you have a supervisor who just wants to go by the book, they're not going to let psychiatrists do much therapy. And the protocols for dealing with suicidality, for dealing with med management, for dealing with most things is very much a cookie cutter approach, and does not lend itself to clinicians exercising their own judgment. And to a degree, you can understand that they're running a massive system that serves 9 or 10 million consumers, and so they can't have everybody doing things their way. But the degree to which it's structured and mapped out, I mean, literally to the point that if something comes up in a session, you have a checklist that you have to go by, and forget whatever else you wanted to talk about or what you might be engaged with that person at the time. You got to go down that protocol. And so it's it's kind of limiting, didn't allow for a lot of flexibility.
You know, that's interesting to hear that, because when I talk to a lot of veterans, and I've been working with veterans now for almost 12 years or more, and one of the things I love about them is all the protocol, all the requirements, all the regulations, all the training that they have, and then the ability to change all the mission, change all the protocol when they're on the mission and go, no, wait, we got to do this now, even though we planned for this. And we're going to now do that because that's what fits the mission. So the success of the mission was more important than following the protocol, right? So all the planning went out the window when they finally got on the mission and realized, oh, we're all well trained. We're going to change it up. You're doing this, we're doing that. And off they go, because the success of the mission and the safety of the soldiers was more important than following the protocol. So what's interesting to me is to hear this, is to understand that the success of the military is they have the option when they're on a mission to not follow the protocol because something came up. Like that could be a title of your book, something came up. And like we want to go towards the something that came up because that's going to help the mission. So
right, like Mike Tyson said, your plan goes out the window when you get smacked in the mouth.
That's right. That's exactly right. I work with a boxer, and so I get that. One of my clients is a boxer, and I get that. He says that a lot, actually.
Yeah, that was certainly not the case, and was not my experience there. The structure was what was most important, and so yeah, and that it applies to a lot of things. I mean, one of the things for us as prescribers was that we had very, very limited flexibility in prescribing things. There were some pretty rigid protocols. We were very much bossed by the pharmacists.
Wait, the pharmacists telling you what to give and what you can give?
Oh, yes.
All right. It's a little ass backwards, to say the least.
Yeah, I don't know how that applies nationally, but I suspect my experience and our experience through the Richmond VA is probably pretty similar. They have algorithms that they go by, and you can't argue your own exceptions to it. Their model is that it's an evidence-based protocol, which is good. That's logical. You don't want a bunch of cowboys or cowgirls saying, I know what's best because this worked for me or for my patients, without there being some evidence behind it. But there are a lot of things that if you stifle the judgment and the creativity of the people who are working for you blindly, then you're really, I think, limiting the reach of what can be done. And so yes, the prescribing of medicine could have been done by a robot with pharmaceutical protocols built in.
Yeah. And of course, and here's what I heard over and over and over again. So I actually worked very close to where you are for 5 years. I worked at Boulder Crest Retreat, and I helped create a curriculum called the Warrior Path. And we had men and women, combat veterans, came in with bags. I'm telling you, bags, 15, 20 medications, because of exactly what you said. which is here's the protocol. And the trouble with the evidence for me is I don't get how somebody's bipolar or disorder or PTSD is the same as someone else's. The symptoms may be similar, the severity won't be the same, and how they got it is not the same. Therefore, this kind of easy diagnostic way that we work is a one size fits all for the most part. And I don't even know when you don't have it. Like, maybe I don't have it every day. Like, there's just so many variables that you, as a person, an experienced person sitting across from someone, can make a judgment based on all the information you know of what happened. Not what's wrong, but what happened. And therefore, even the medications that are evidence-based and what you can prescribe could be used in a very different way according to how you prescribe it and what you and the leader of their treatment, which is the patient, that's the leader of their treatment, that's who should be the leader, they can then come back to you and say, you know what, doctor, I did feel a little tiny lift. And then I was able to get up off the couch. Or this one, nope, this was, yeah, no, I sunk deeper into the cushion with this. So by you not being able to spend that extra time, to not be able to understand that everybody has some uniqueness to their healing path. Right.
Yeah, and you alluded to something that I think is really important, and that is diagnostic categories. You know, if you and we're very much driven by that. You know, if you diagnose somebody with PTSD, then everything you do has to fit with what their protocol for PTSD is, kind of disavowing the reality that everybody with PTSD is different and unique. And so, you know, I understand, and we all understand the need to categorize because that's how research is done, and that's where you know, you obviously need to benefit from knowing what similarities are, but if you lose sight of the uniqueness of individuals and are merely treating a diagnosis rather than a person, then you know, you kind of lost the battle already.
Yeah, and that's unfortunately too much of what I hear and what the customer, and I thank you for calling them customers, say to us. You know, for those of us that don't work in the VA and we're providing services outside. At one time they were called alternative. Now they're almost more mainstream than anything else. I will share one thing with you. I don't know a lot about CBOC, but here's what I do know about hang on one second, someone's trying to call. There we go. I do know that when I lived in Australia, they had hospitals, of course, large hospitals. Every single community, every little town, every little village had what we now call urgent care. But we didn't have these when you and I were growing up. You went to the emergency room. There was no little storefront, you know. And I couldn't help but think about, is CBOC that idea that you can have a smaller, and you could have a whole bunch of little satellite wellness centers, I'd like to call them, where people can help get well physically, emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually, as opposed to going to the monolithic VA. Is that possible? And is that what CBOC is like? Could it be better to do that?
Yes, I mean, the CBOCs are an outstanding means of outreach. You know, when before the and I did not work in the VA before the CBOCs came into existence, and I'm not even sure when that was, but in Virginia, and you know, Richmond and Salem are the main venues, the anchors. And as you know, Virginia is huge, and you can, especially down in Southwest Virginia, you may have to go 150 miles or more to get to the clinic. So the CBOC allowed a lot of people to more conveniently go to places and be seen and treated by people with familiarity with veterans, and it's a great thing. It also has evolved that even with the CBOC, if somebody had to drive over 40 miles to get to a CBOC, they would be paid travel expenses in order to do that. So the VA's done a lot of great things, really, and one of the things that it really does make a great effort to do is outreach to veterans of all types, and to try to make it easier for veterans to get to clinics, sometimes to pay for treatment if someone is too far away for even a CBOC. They can be seen, and non-VA providers can be contracted with to treat them. And so they've really done a lot, I think, to try to assure that any veteran who wants to be seen through a veterans clinic can do so.
Right. Yeah. I mean, to me, that just makes sense. I'm sort of thinking about FOBs, and I think about all the things that they've taught me when they're on a mission. And I was thinking about how easily they can set something up in the military and get things rolling. And I was thinking that just doesn't make sense to me, that you need one huge big campus for everything. I mean, certainly there's certain kinds of medical treatment that you need, operating rooms and like that. I get that. But boy, for most of who I work with and have the honor to work with, it's kind of more the weekly, daily, monthly management of wellness practices, including medication. So I think one thing is that when we only prescribe medication, what we're saying is that's supposed to fix it. That was never what psychopharmacology was developed for. It was supposed to help you do the practices that will help you change. That's what it's supposed to do. So therefore you as the psychiatrist, deserve to monitor and supervise and encourage the wellness practices that the medication is supposed to help you do. Am I right on that? Is that a better way of looking at medication?
Yes, in that, I think what you're speaking to there is something that I'm a great believer in, and that is that the process is what's most important. Process is more important than content. The way you go about doing things is what's most important. So that requires some flexibility and understanding of how utilization of resources is difficult. The VA, this is maybe going off on a little tangent, but I just made some notes to myself of things that you might want to hear about. Whether you want to hear my opinions or not, I don't know.
I do. That's why we called you.
But one of the things that I think is a big mistake nationally is having the VA be run by political appointees. We went through a lot of changes in the last decade, and I'm not a believer in general that most agencies need to be run by somebody who has the favor of the governor or the president, I don't think they should be political positions. And I think too much turnover at the top bad idea. And if you have a good long-term vision and somebody's there wanting to implement it, then you can't really do that and change the person every 4 to 8 years.
Yeah, I agree. Never mind the fact that even though you and I are civilians, and I've learned so much by working with veterans, we're also disruptors. So there's times where you need a combination of both. So when I helped with Boulder Crest, when I was asked to help with Boulder Crest, we disrupted sort of the invisible wounds of war, the idea that all symptoms are bad. Like, I don't know about you, but I have OCD. I can't even say it. And it's not, it's wonderful. All my friends want me to come to their house because I help clean. But the point being is that symptoms are mild, moderate, and severe. I say everything's like salsa, right? So you don't necessarily need to change every symptom that you have that you got from a traumatic event like being on a battlefield. Now, what we discovered was, and I love what you're saying about changing the leadership. Sometimes changing the leadership is making sure that it is a bit of a disruptor that's going to push the envelope a little bit more and say, no, wait, these CBOCs are a good idea. Let's do smaller, let's do that. Let's have the psychiatrists have more time, because I know that situational awareness is a wonderful gift to have when you're in a crisis. When you are in a hurricane or somewhere like that, I want that. The thing that we also have to understand is that self-awareness, it's also SA. So these are the things that working with veterans I've learned is that, yes, you're looking for the threat outside of you, and what you and I get to do is help them find the threat inside of them that was placed inside from trauma way before the military. So the fact that the VA doesn't want to know anything about what happened to you before the military, first of all, is completely short-sighted and doesn't make sense. It's not a holistic view of the person. So talk about a process. And they don't really care what's happening to you after the military, that car crash that you had after you got out. And I just can't work that way. I can't look at a person that way. It's everything. If the trauma of childhood actually made you go into the military, okay. And if it made you a better soldier because you already know how to be in a battlefield in the middle of your living room with your mom and dad, then we should help you with that too. That should be part of your story, and we need to hear it. So when you say check the box, that's a way to put a boundary up to say, no, I don't need to know anything that happened to you the first 17 or 18 years of your life. Even though we know that 35% of all veterans go into the military with horrific childhood, with very high ACEs. And I think that when you talk about leadership, it's a both for me. I agree. I don't want it to be a political appointee. And it may be smart to have someone from the military, although it may be smart to have a team. That's the other thing the military does, not just one person, but a team of leaders that are willing to look at the whole picture. What do you think of that?
Yes. And especially if the team structure makes a lot of sense, because if one person changes, that doesn't necessarily mean that the team has to change.
That's right.
One of the things that I saw in the turnover that happened twice during the time that I was there, in just 5 years, we had 3 different secretaries, that each one wanted to, it was like the CEO rolling out a new product. And the CEO had to put his stamp, and they've all been hymns, had to put his stamp on it, and here's what we're going to do. More to reflect what that person wanted to do for for his legacy than what was really needed and appropriate and necessary for the system. Yeah, and we all had the same thing at our local, or our regional, that in Richmond, the person who, those people also had great turnover, and the same kind of thing, that there was more cheerleading, and it felt like you were selling cars or something when you listened to them, and even though there are a lot of good leaders throughout the VA, it doesn't take being a good, smart, wise leader to be one. It really takes certain things that I think are not particularly useful, like kissing up to your boss and being able to say a lot of things that maybe don't have great substance to them. But anyway, I don't want to be too negative.
No, to me, it's kind of like I need to know what I do well, and then I need to know what I deserve to change. I always say to people, you don't need therapy. You deserve support. You deserve someone who's truly willing to sit with you and go on this journey with you. And I think you said something so important is like, if we're encouraging people to tell us their truth, and then I go into a staff meeting and I can't tell my truth, there's a huge problem just in that process. Like you were talking about the process. It's like, I shouldn't be asking people to do things that then I'm not allowed to do, or I can't do in the system that is helping you. I mean, there's just too much of a disconnect here that doesn't make sense to me and is dangerous. I'm just going to say it outright. It's dangerous when we don't do the work that we're asking people to do, and they know it. They'll walk in that door and smell it a mile away. What's the most wonderful thing about veterans is that they smell bullshit, like in the parking lot. They'll smell it, and they'll walk right up to you, and that they know. So you did something so unique. You didn't start out as the doctor. You didn't start out with the power differential. You started out as a social worker. You were boots on the ground. That's who you were. And that's what most of the men and women that I work with really appreciate. When someone was in the, as they used to say, in the trenches. We don't have trenches anymore very much. But they were doing the work. And it's different. You look different. You look at things differently. You approach things differently. So in many ways, the men and women that you served would have believed that you served. I bet they constantly thought that you served because of how you are, Joe. Just the way that you present yourself, just the way that you are. Is that true? Did they think you served?
Well, that you're giving me more of a compliment than I deserved.
That's the second time we did that. First Cindy, now me.
I think that maybe veterans have a better idea than the average person of genuineness in people. Whether you served and are true comrades or not, I think it's you know who the people are who give a damn, and
that's right.
Your term was disruptors. The disruptors don't go very far in the VA hierarchy. Butt kissers do, but not disruptors. So the people who maybe agitate for things to be different from how they are not people who are going to end up in positions of leadership. But the people who are getting treated, I think, know who the good people are and the people who care. And, I was very fortunate at the CBOC where I worked that we had a really, really good crew of people who really gave a damn and still do. A lot of them still work there. I see with some regularity. So I was very fortunate in the setting where I worked, and it was extremely educational for me. I was very fortunate to be able to use some of the time that I had to do some therapy, which was not expected or encouraged and even discouraged. But we had enough distance from Richmond that our supervision for our time wasn't quite as harsh as it would have been if we had been in Richmond. And I was really fortunate to find some veterans who needed something that they hadn't gotten yet, and was able to hear people's stories and learn something about what their experiences were that I just didn't have any idea of. My father was a veteran, and he was shot in the Philippines very early on, and he rarely talked about his combat experiences throughout the rest of his life until close to the end. And so I really learned much more from a lot of the veterans that I worked with than I did from my father or from any experiences I had prior to that. And it was really kind of shocking to me how many people there were who had held on to really, really traumatic events and memories that still affect them 40, 50 years later, that they had never talked about in any depth. And to be able to hear that and let some of those people do some work that they needed to do, it was extremely rewarding.
Yeah, it is.
And I hate it when people say, "Oh, it's humbling." It's such a cliche now. When people say that, most of the time they're not really being humble. But I truly am humbled by it because some of those experiences were just so unimaginable, and people got to go on living lives after having their buddy next to him's face blown off, and things that just don't go away.
Yeah, I've had the same experience and continue to have it. One of the things that we talk a lot about at MVP, Merging Vets and Players, where we have weekly huddles all over the country. Now we're in 8 cities and we have Zooms, is the idea of survivor's guilt. We've changed the jargon to survivor's responsibility, that you get to live the life that your buddy didn't get to live. Therefore, that's a mission. That's what you signed up for. That's what you promised. And the second thing is, we often talk about the confusion between guilt and grief. More times than not, the veterans that I work with believe that they're guilty of something, as opposed to having not had the opportunity to grieve. That you're not going to grieve in that battle. You're not going to grieve until, and then by the time you get far enough away from it to grieve, I can't tell anybody because now I feel guilty. So it's been wonderful to have people like yourself to be able to be there and have these wonderful moments and sessions where people can share what happened to them. Once again, we're back to that word, not what's wrong, but what happened to them is so important.
In the analytic training that most psychiatrists get, they distinguish between shame and guilt, and I don't always know exactly how to distinguish the two, but in this case, it did seem to me that even though it may just be a little wordplay, but ashamed, the sense of shame, even more than guilt, is what resonated with me.
Yeah.
And I think the idea that people will not understand what happened to me, that a lot of what kept so many people from being able to express themselves and get the help that they needed was, nobody can really understand this. And it just,
yeah. And they miss their team for that, right? That's who will understand, which is why I always joke with all of our members of MVP, and I go, I'm second. Don't ever I'm second. Go talk to your sister. Go talk to your brothers. Go talk to the men and women you served with about what happened first. Get that connection first, and then come. So that peer-to-peer support, it's how you did the mission. Why would we not then reinstate? And that's the other problem with the VA for me, is where are those moments where these customers walk in and they are given the honor that you know what you need, you know what you deserve, you are a veteran, you've done the work. So we're here. It's almost like the old wraparound idea where, I'm sure you remember that as a social work. It's like, you tell us what you need and we'll help you get it, as opposed to we'll tell you. He's shaking his head, folks, for you that can't see him right now. Joe is shaking his head profusely.
Well, a lot of what you say really resonates, and you got a lot of wisdom there, Susan.
Well, I'm just a few years older than you. So there you go.
I don't know about that.
I am. So you graduated in 1972. Is that correct, in high school?
Right. Uh-huh.
I graduated. Are you ready? Everybody out there, start doing the math. I graduated in 1968.
Uh-huh.
I look pretty good for an old lady. So.
You look real good for an old lady.
Well, I box 3 days a week with George Foreman's son. Everybody look it up. It's called craft boxing. So I do that. But it's actually the work with these amazing men and women that, I'm absolutely so blessed. And the horses, they help too. They absolutely do. So I can't thank you enough. I wanted to ask you, can we come back? And what I'd love to do, and not too many people do this, I'd love to get a Zoom where there's a bunch of veterans on, men and women, and you guys could start to talk about what could you do differently? What is it? Because this idea that I always joke with them and say, you're a hybrid now. You were a civilian before you went into the military, maybe not even much of one if you grew up in a military family and you had a military father. And then you are in the military, and then you have to come back into the civilian world, but you're never going to be one or the other. You're not 100% military anymore, and you're not 100% civilian anymore. It's this hybrid mix, and we need these men and women in this country, like right now and forever. And the fact is that we miss that. They don't have to become, quote unquote, a civilian. They get to be this hybrid, this experience that I believe can help all of us in communities. And that's the other problem is that when there's a hierarchy of there's something wrong with you, and you walk into a place where all of a sudden you're not the doctor. You're not the general. You're not any of that. You're just the person being helped. And there is something about that is not healing. It's not wellness practice from any point of view or perspective. So some of the things I tell the men and women that I work with is, you walk into that VA, and just like you would walk into the car dealership or into the grocery store, and you say, this is what I need. Do you have this? Because if you don't have it, I'm going to go to another store. Right? Because this is what I need. This is how I need it. So just to be able to empower, I never say M, because I'm not giving anybody any power. They already have it in them. So I spell it I-N, empowerment. So to help them discover, utilize their power is to walk in there and be the person that is the team leader of their wellness. That's who it is. That's the leader.
This is good stuff.
Yeah. So will you like, I'm putting you on the spot right now because
I'm retired. I haven't necessarily found my mission yet.
And,
I do need to apply myself a little more than I have the last year or so.
You're the wise elders. Like, this culture is so youth oriented. I have a grandson and everything, and I tell you, I know Snapchat and I know all the rappers because I keep up on shit like that. And my grandson loves that he has somebody that he can go to that can say, even when he plays Call of Duty, I'm saying, these are actual wars. Let me tell you where that was. And he's all excited. He goes, really? These were real battles? I go, these are real battles that you get to know about. So anyway, I would love us to continue, if that's okay with you, because you do have a wonderful perspective. You came from someplace, you've done a lot, and the fact that both you and I work with combat veterans and veterans in general, anybody that served, it's a real great, you called it humbling experience, and is a wisdom keeper. It's something that gives us that wisdom that we get to keep forever.
Yeah, and for those of us who did not serve in the military, to be able to serve is it's valuable and it's important. And I admire all the work that you've done. I have read up a little bit on you, and
did you see the Fabio video? You didn't see the Fabio video, I bet, though, because that's out there.
No, but I appreciate your work, and I'd love to support it.
Great. All right, everybody. Joe Mason, psychiatrist, worked in the VA in Charlottesville for 5 years, and I think he's officially crazy well. I mean, I'm just going to say, Doc, you're definitely crazy well, because we want to be crazy well. And the theme song is by Calvin Love, and it's called Be Your Best Self. So I'm so grateful to that young man that gave me that song, and you can find him all over the place. He's from a very well-known music family, so you might want to look him up. And to all the people at MVP and at Coming Home Well, I'm so grateful. Joe Mason, I got your no, I don't have your number, so don't give it to me right now, but email me your number, because all I have is your email, and that way we'll stay in touch for sure, and we'll do this again real soon with a bunch of veterans who will teach us even more.
Great. Thanks, Susie. I appreciate that opportunity.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.